All right. Hello, everyone. I think we're live. It says we're live. I'm
I
so
saw I
excited.
saw it say so. So yeah.
We've never done a live. We're so excited. Welcome, 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 wherever you are, whether it's the middle of your day, the beginning of your day, the end of your day. We hope that you have a cup of coffee handy, water, whatever you need. We're so glad that you're able to be with us today. My name is Carrie Mayevsky, and I lead growth strategy at SQA Group. I've got my colleague, Rob Olmschneider, on the call. Rob, you want to say a quick hello?
Hello, everybody. My name's Rob Olmschneider. I'm the head of advanced analytics here at SQA Group. So happy here to be here today to talk to you about dark data. Really excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. We also have the amazing Katoria Leach, who is with us from afar. We have not quite perfected the cloning process. However, we are so excited that Katoria could be in quite literally two places at the same time. So we've got a few messages from Katoria. She's going to be popping in and out. And Katoria is another incredible member of our data team. And we're so excited to be here. You might have known of SQA for years. This might be your first time getting to experience us. So wherever you find yourselves, welcome. We are a technology and advisory services firm, and we're really passionate about helping companies elevate use cases around data, software engineering, innovation. So if you are here wanting to do remarkable or just even ordinary things with data, you're in the right spot. We are going to be diving into how to elevate these critical insights that you have in your organization. And you are here today to dive into all things dark data. And you might be wondering, what is dark data? Why does it matter? We're going to be getting to all of that today. And to begin, just to do a little context and level set for all of you, what's so interesting is dark data is actually, I think, Rob, you found this statistic that nearly half of all data is considered dark. So it's super important that we're here. It's super important that as leaders, whether we lead marketing, sales, data, technology, it really doesn't matter that we are taking responsibility in terms of elevating the data that is in our organizations. So with that, we are going to be throwing it over to Katoria, who is coming to us from afar. Again, we are so excited she was able to be in two places at the same time. And the first question we've got for Katoria is, what is dark data, so that we can all have a quick level set? So I'm going to throw it over to Katoria to get us started.
Great question. Dark data, simply put, is data that is being acquired that we do not access and or use. The key here is that dark data exists whether or not we want it to. And this is a particular gift, if you will, of the Internet of Things, or IoT. You cannot stop dark data from being acquired. It simply is. And as a result, we have a obligation to illuminate, unveil, harness it. Sometimes dark data is even called bad data because it usually is very hard to leverage, located in silos within your organization, cannot be extracted automatically, or it takes a little infrastructure building to get to the place where you can extract it automatically. However, dark data is monumentally important for businesses because data driven decisions are the best kind of decisions. And we can extract insights from this data to produce actionable intelligence that supports the goals of the organization. Nowadays, things like educated guesses will no longer meet the mark. And mistakes are becoming harder and harder to recover from because the internet remembers, data remembers, right? So, dark data is definitely for the businesses who seek to be able to predict rather than guess, um, respond rather than react, uh, and most importantly, discover rather than stumble upon, right? You want to be at the forefront of what's going on, not lagging behind, trying to play catch up. So, there are so many opportunities to identify, for example, inefficiencies, bridge gaps between business and technical stakeholders, and enable a data driven strategy within an organization, most importantly, by leveraging this dark data. So, in order to better understand dark data, the first step is, right, unveiling it, looking at it, seeing what you have, and embracing it rather than shying away from it, right? We have to be comfortable with looking this data dead in the face and really embracing it and wanting to use it within our organizations, because we know that it'll be definitely worth it and it will take us to the next level.
I love when she says, "Look it in the face." By the way, because I just keep thinking about how dark data is so scary for so many folks because we don't know what to do with it. It's hard to analyze. So, Rob, what would you add to this? Oh, I think Rob is frozen. So, what I will add as he is coming back is something that we've been in conversations with so many clients over so many different parts of industries, verticals, et cetera, is that dark data is kind of this feeling that, like, you want to elevate something new. There is something in the current that just is telling you to dive deeper to elevate something that hasn't quite been there before. But it can feel so overwhelming in terms of where to start. So when we talk about dark data, whether it's with clients or just business leaders that we're in the community with, it's what Katoria referenced with being able to say, let's look it dead in the eye. Let's make sure that we are able to ask questions of it that are super important. Let's be willing to ask questions that maybe we've never asked before to uncover something that hasn't quite been there before. And to make sure that we are always brave enough to just say, what do I need to see that I haven't been able to see before? And Rob, you're back. This is perfect because I was going to throw it over to you next to say, what would you add in terms of what is dark data and how we should be defining it?
Thanks, Carrie. And, I thought that Katoria gave a great answer, especially right at the very beginning. One of her first statements was that dark data is data that we have, but we aren't really using. And, I think most of us have heard the expression that data is the new oil. And when we hear that expression, we think of it as this, valuable natural resource, right? We think of, Jed Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies, right? Striking it rich by striking oil. But it's not just about the value of data and the value of oil, because oil doesn't come out of the ground like gasoline. It needs to be refined. And similarly, most raw data is not going to provide value to the business. It needs to be refined. And so I think one thing that's important to keep in mind when we discuss dark data is one of the reasons that we have more dark data than ever before is because indeed we have more data than ever before. And really what we need to look at is that the definition of data, at least from a practical business perspective, has changed. And our mindset needs to change to go along with that. So it used to be, that we would think of data as numbers on a spreadsheet, right? Things that neatly fit into rows and columns. But data now, in terms of what you can do with analyzing it, is text, it's video, audio, pictures. You have advanced analytic techniques like machine learning, where you can look for patterns in things that aren't just, numbers that you can pull off of a P&L. And so now that all of these things can be analyzed, if we have them and we aren't doing anything with them, now they're dark. So these represent a tremendous opportunity for us to gain some new business insight.
Thank you for those great ads. I've got another one coming over to you. So we've got our definition level set, which I think is super important as leaders. So I am curious, what types of dark data would you say are out there?
Yeah. So I think there's a number of different reasons that companies aren't using their data. And some of these reasons are more justifiable than others. But when it comes to dark data, I think they fall into three general categories. So one is issues of quality. So you have data that's inconsistent, incomplete, corrupt, unreliable. Basically, for any reason, it's something that you can't trust to make business decisions. Second, I would go back to what I said in my first comment, which was all of those different. When you think about text, you think about audio, video. These are different structures for data, right? And so that data is there, but the different structure requires different approaches. And so businesses might not necessarily have the technology in place or the personnel with expertise in place to be ready to analyze that. And then finally, I would look at data that's simply not accessible right now. It could be in a system where it's just hard to get to. It could be two systems that don't talk to one another that really that need to. And so that's when we get into solutions that center around integration and how can we get those systems to talk to one another. So Thinking about some real world examples, I would say, picture a contact center, for example, or really any customer facing team. Um, Picture them entering notes about customers into like a CRM, for example. Or even it could be a customer directly giving feedback through email, through a chat bot. So this is all text. We talked about being able to analyze text before. And I call this gray data rather than dark data because it's not quite dark. You can find it. You can go into the CRM, look somebody up and find these notes. But it's also not fully illuminating because you do have to go and look that up person by person. But now you can take a technology like natural language processing and you can analyze this for common themes. What are some things that come up? You can even, if it's feedback directly from the customer, you can look at the sentiment of the remark to say, was this positive? Was this negative? And so based on that, you can start to quantify some of this qualitative data. Another example is any sort of business that has an e-commerce component to it. You've got plenty of data on your sales conversions. I'm sure you're using that. But there's also abandoned carts, right? So virtually every e-commerce application now saves what you have. Like if I go to Amazon, I add a couple of things to my cart and then I forget about it. I go back to Amazon again, it's going to be there, right? But are these businesses using that data for more than just, hey, here's what you had before, right? There are patterns that we can look for that say, this is why people aren't completing this transaction, right? Is there a way that we can couple it with web activity, which can also be dark data if we aren't using it? How people are moving through a website to say if there's a user experience issue that we need to tackle. So what are the patterns that are stopping people from completing a transaction? That's a really powerful piece of information in understanding customer behavior. And the last thing I would say is segmentation, right? So every marketing team is concerned with customer segmentation. And you have the traditional approach, which is just driven by a lot of guesswork and gut. But now data it should have a seat at the table. So our systems that just have so much more information on customers than ever before. And the key is using that to appeal directly to them. So advanced approaches use something called psychographics. So this moves beyond just demographics or beyond even activity. It gets into opinions, values, attitudes, lifestyles, things like that. And so by tapping into what we know on a deep level about our customers, but we just aren't using it right now, we can even figure out how to better talk to them on an individual level. And so it's really more powerful in getting that message across.
I love those. I love the example, and hopefully a theme that's becoming clear as you're listening to this is it's the responsibility of each and every one of us. So whether we're in marketing or sales or data, there is a real ability to, and Rob, I love how you said this, that the data might not be quite dark, but it also might not be illuminated. So it's about making a decision to elevate it and illuminate it, regardless of the function that you're in. So, thinking in your own world as you're listening, thinking about what data are you wishing you could have access to that you don't? How could you use it, as Rob said, to shape your decisions around whether it's customer acquisition or the journey or efficiencies, productivity? And I want to now throw it back to Katoria, who has some really cool company use cases that have been very widely shared and acknowledged in the conversation of all things dark data, of actual companies that are taking a stance on making sure that they're illuminating their dark data.
So I'll use an healthcare example to start. Indiana University Health, or IU Health, had a problem where they were given a lot of unstructured data in the form of written as well as verbal physician notes. And the question is, right, how do we leverage that to enable, right, holistic, best possible patient care? In addition to that, taking it to the next level, they were interested in leveraging external data like the patient's socioeconomic factors, being, their income status, right, demographic factors, because that can also play a role in patient care. So what they found is they can actually use voice recognition, deep learning, and text analysis to look at the physician both verbal and written notes to extract that information in an automated way, and then use cognitive computing to analyze the patient's socioeconomic factors and then weave that together to create this holistic picture for the patient as well as the healthcare provider, so that that interaction can be more meaningful, and more data driven. Another great example is a retail example, Stitch Fix. So the issue here was Stitch Fix would like to know what their customers like, without trying to guess or use some archaic method like a focus group, for example. So the dark data in this example is images from social media that they may not have been able to access before, and questionnaires to their customers. And any other source, Internet of Things again, any other source that tracks emerging fashion trends and evolving customer preferences. So what happened was they take all this data and they use artificial intelligence algorithms to develop personas around their customers. So their customers are getting actual targeted recommendations based on the data that they are providing, so that there's this loop, if you will. Their social media helps Stitch Fix identify their preferences, and then Stitch Fix can fulfill that by doing the right kind of production as well as marketing. Another great example is Kroger supermarket. So Kroger has coupons, right? They're known for providing great value, but they wanted to optimize that. So how can we make sure that the right coupons are going to the right customers, because that's going to create that value add for the customer, right? What's good is a useless coupon. So what they did with their Kroger app is through the purchase tracking, they're able to see the customer preferences, and then they can leverage the Internet of Things as well as advanced analytics techniques to identify which items would that customer would most likely use a coupon for, get them back in the store, create that value add. And then another really great example, probably my favorite example, is a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, with a nonprofit called The Lonely Entrepreneur. So again, the issue here is, how do we measure the impact, in this case, of education and resources on underrepresented minorities? How do we look at that specific sector within our base to make sure that we're addressing their needs most importantly? And the data was their interaction with the learning management system and any questionnaires that they filled out. So to glean insight from that, they leverage analytics techniques to quantify impacts for these especially at-risk groups. So there's several different examples and several different sectors, if you will, of dark data being harnessed, so that these businesses not only can track that they are on the right path, but also take their business to the next level by unveiling opportunities that they could not have accessed otherwise.
So I love so many of Katoria's examples. One thing that Katoria said that we always talk about at SQA Group is start with a phrase, how do we want to measure blank? And change what the blank is over and over again to get a sense of how could you measure that thing in your organization that you want to peer into in a way you never have before, so that you can glean new insights and illuminate new parts of your business. And I had the great honor of getting to work with Katoria and some incredible women across the country recently to do just this. So wanted to give you all one more example of dark data illumination that can even be in a hypothetical. So we set out through my women's organization, the Women in Leadership Nexus, to answer the question, how can we measure career advancement for women in a future of work era? So we changed the question, right? So if we think about how to measure career advancement for women, there are some great tried and true KPIs, and they're amazing. We celebrate them. They're super important for the organizational dashboard. But by changing the question, just as Katoria gave the example of with the lonely entrepreneur, we added a qualifier to say, how might we measure career advancement for women in a future of work era? And just by changing the definition, it changed the conversation. So we brought hundreds of women together across America to just have discussions and leverage design thinking frameworks and workshops to come up with new phrases, new descriptors, new ideas for what career advancement for women could look like in this new modern era. And the ideas were flowing. We were talking about things that we wish organizations would embrace. We dreamed a little bit. We talked about kind of the utopic view of what it might look like. And from there, all these new KPIs were able to be created in a recently revealed guide that we put out just this week. And we found 10 plus new metrics that can make the organizational dashboard. And those KPIs are example of data that is just sitting within the walls of an organization, but we haven't understood how to measure it in that way before. So for instance, one of our KPIs that we are proposing for organizations out there is a flight risk predictor score, of being able to measure and kind of create a calculator, if you will, that's custom to your organization, but measure the at risk employees in your organization before they actually quit. So, looking at things like what percent of hours are they communicating after hours? Are they underutilizing their PTO? Are they maybe the last to receive information communication wide, and just using all these variables to figure out what roles in your organization are most at risk. So that's data that any organization has, but it hasn't been illuminated because we haven't changed the questions in so long. So that's just one more example of when we change the how might we measure and we put in a different qualifier, we can unearth not only new KPIs, but illuminate the data that's sitting right within our organizations. So Rob, I wanted to bring it over to you now and would love to hear some, just round us out some final use case examples that we should all be thinking about.
A couple come to mind that I think illustrate some different lessons learned, some different takeaways. And the first one is a case where the boundaries, the obstacles that we face were not technical in nature at all. The technical part of the challenge that we faced was actually pretty easy. It was a lot of foundation laying business side challenges. And so this is from a few years ago, where I was working inside an enterprise to launch an enterprise data warehouse. We're trying to get it off the ground so we could really try to get a 360-degree view of our customers. And again, this is not the boundaries we weren't even getting to the technical issues just yet. We had a lot of legacy systems. Probably the most important system had very limited data output. I mean, it had most of the important output that we needed for like day-to-day reporting. But there were some data points where we could see it in the system interface. And we thought it would be useful to analyze that data. We just couldn't get it. We couldn't get it out of the system through reporting. They didn't have a robust API that we could pull that from, which was something we would usually use. So, if you think of the reasons that I mentioned earlier why data might be dark, this was a case of inaccessibility. And we actually had to, the very first thing we had to do is to lobby the vendor to even get direct access to this data. Now, for context, it was a highly regulated industry. And so the concerns that they had weren't without merit. They were very cautious about doing this. In fact, they had over 500 clients. I think they said that only one they had ever allowed this level of access to their data. And so we had to do a number of things before we even could entertain the conversation. First thing that we had to do was, prove that we had acceptable data governance. We had a charter in place that we took it seriously. I had to prove the technical prowess, the sort of the capability of my team to be able to work with this data that they didn't support. Like they weren't going to be able to answer questions about it. We were kind of on our own. We had to write all sorts of policies around, how these data were going to be used, who was going to be able to access it, all of those types of things. So even with a vendor, as a client-vendor relationship, as the client, I should have been able to exercise a lot of control. We still had a case where there was a lot of business work to tackle before we even started talking technology. And, many organizations, they see this internally, right? They see this with silos that they have to break down, or politics that they have to get past to even get two systems to talk to one another, or to get the people that control those systems to even allow them to talk to one another. And so it can be challenging, but I'm happy to report that in that case, we did our homework, with some dogged persistence on my part of some of the other senior leaders. We were able to become client number 2 that was able to get that full exposure to that system. Another example, is more recent example that I can think of, is a company that we worked with. They wanted to leverage data to inform their go-to-market strategy. And this was very much a case of, you don't know what you don't know. And I know that's a trite saying, but it has some real implications when you think about how we even approach analysis. So trying not to get too Donald Rumsfeld over here, but if you know what you don't know, it makes analysis relatively easy. I'm trying not to get myself in trouble with my team here, but it's not academic in nature, but you know the questions that need to be answered. When you don't know what you don't know, you don't even know the questions, right? And so you got to figure those out, and then you've got to answer them. So here's where we might need some artificial intelligence, because we need to look for some patterns that humans aren't going to be able to find, or if they can find them, it's going to take way too long to be business valuable. So we started by rooting out some data quality issues, some that they knew about, some that they didn't. And then we used some advanced algorithms so we could determine some cause and effect. They wanted to sell more to a certain target audience. So why weren't they doing well there? And why were they actually doing well with this other audience that wasn't actually their target? And what lessons can we learn from the latter that we can apply to the former to make those campaigns more effective? And so they walked away with some insight that surprised them. It surprised us. And we actually handed those models, they could use those going forward to continue to predict the success or failure of any sort of go-to-market strategies that they were going to pursue. So it was very, very helpful to them to use it as a compass for their go-to-market.
Thanks for adding those. There's such a central theme, clearly, with questions and just asking different questions, new questions, questions that you don't know that you have, inviting other people in to ask questions that they might have. And that through those questions and the discovery, we can open up the broader conversation to illuminate something that we feel is there, but we just don't quite know how to get our hands on it. So I want to shift to, we always like to end these conversations, or really any conversation, with kind of the cost of not doing things. I think that, there's a lot of interest in certainly things around data, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It, of course, can conjure up so many images as well, both scary and exciting at the same time. But there is a real cost to not elevating our dark data. We talked about a few examples just in the real world of what comes from illuminating it. But wanted to wrap up with just a few kind of tips and strategies to making sure that we are taking a stance as leaders in our businesses, regardless of what we lead within our organizations, to make sure that we are elevating that dark data. So I'm going to throw it over to Katoria for her final tips and tricks, and then Rob and I are going to bring this home.
The cost of not using dark data is you're limiting the opportunity potential, and that in itself can be pretty scary. As humans, we naturally impose limitations on the data by bucketizing it, or trying to put it into categories, or create patterns where patterns may or may not exist. That's our human nature. We label data as marketing data or product data or sales data based on our understanding, which might be inherently limited. We don't know everything, and there's this unintentional limit on the potential of the AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. When given the freedom of data observance, these tools can see more than we could ever see, right? They have access to more than we can ever compute. So when we bucketize our data, we're putting blinders on these models that could probably see so much more. We're capping our potential before it even begins by limiting it to our understanding, or what we used to know, or what we think we know. We have to be ready to embrace the unknown. And that's what this is all about. That's what dark data is all about. So in order to do this, we have really 3 things that we need to implement. First is the way we think, right? That we must encourage a data-driven culture. So really the two tenets I would say to summarize is removing barriers between departments, right? This is a data-driven organization, not a data-driven department, right? There's not a data department. We are all driven by data within this organization. And then second part, tackling unstructured data head on, right? You have to be willing to dive into the unstructured data and make a sense of the chaos so you can get to that next level with your insights. The second is building a data infrastructure. So the data infrastructure is the actual technology, right? The hardware, software, networking, the services that you use in order to acquire data from a variety of sources. So this will empower your company to get as much data as it possibly can from what's, again, already out there. And the second part of that is scraping from the sources that you already have, from technology you already have, as much data as possible, right? So you want to have more than enough to make the decisions and to be confident with your next step. And then the final point is creating a data pipeline. So there's a difference between data infrastructure and pipeline. It can be confusing, but a data infrastructure is the tech and the pipeline is the processing of the data. So how do we ingest, process the data we get from our infrastructure so that we can glean insights, make those connections, and use our AI and machine learning as intended, unrestricted, right? We give it all the data, we put some parameters on it, but we enable it to do the hard, heavy lifting and enable those data-backed decision supports. And, through this, we can create things like real-time dashboards, holistic reports, again, all about seeing the bigger picture and then making that decision and then seeing it, right, have that huge ROI immediately. And that's what dark data can do for us.
Wonderful. We appreciate Katoria's suggestions. I wrote down there is no data department. There are just organizations driven by data. So I think that that's something that each of us can always just remember in our roles and our functions. We still can move the ball down the court a little bit further. So Rob, what would you add? Final thoughts on the cost of not elevating data and maybe some tips to take tomorrow.
Yeah, so Katoria did a great job pretty thoroughly outlining the opportunity cost of not doing anything. I mean, I guess I'll just add to that is that, your competitors are doing something, so this is not, there's no time to wait here. But beyond just, the opportunity cost, which can be somewhat hard to quantify, there is a real literal dollars and cents cost to having this data and not using it. People often think, well, data's in the cloud now, it's, storage isn't an issue. And yes, the cloud is more cost efficient than hardware. There's no debating that, but you still pay more as you store more, right? And so if you've got data that's sitting there unused, you're going to be paying more for those data. You're also exposing yourself to risk if you have personally identifiable information or PII that you have no business purpose for keeping it around. Now, I talk to compliance officers quite a bit that are like, yeah, I have dark data. How do I get rid of it? They're not asking how they can use it. And so there's almost like this arms race of, well, these data do have value. So how can we put it to use before risk and compliance has a good point and says, let's get rid of it because we're not using it. You don't want to keep data just for the sake of keeping it or just in case. If you're going to keep it, put it to use. So a few tips that I would say you can start with fairly quickly. Katoria mentioned driving data culture, and I'll just hop off of that with three, I would say, non-technical infrastructure components that you can start on right now. So the first is having a data strategy. You need specifically a data strategy. It can't just be a sliver of your IT strategy. It needs to stand on its own. And that strategy should be focused on driving business objectives, which will include looking at how dark data can help with driving towards those business goals. The second that I would say is data governance. I know it's not everyone's favorite topic. I happen to love it. I'm weird, but data governance is so important. You heard me mention it earlier with that case of, trying to get that data warehouse, trying to build confidence with our vendor. governance is going to help you keep a high standard of data quality. It's going to define who should have access to the data and how, who's responsible for keeping it clean, help lay out how data initiatives are prioritized and moved forward. So this is really critical. Once you get that sort of remedial data quality issues taken care of, how do you keep things clean? How do you sort of maintain it going forward? And then finally, you've got, I would say, data literacy. All right. So you need everyone in the organization, everybody, to have a baseline level of data literacy. Certainly not just the analytics team. And I mean, not even just, managers, everybody down to the individual contributor. Do they all know how they can use data to be more effective in their jobs, to make better decisions, however impactful those decisions are? And I think when people are more data literate, they become more like the neighborhood watch for dark data. So these are folks that are on the ground level. They're using data every day. They're going to be the ones that step forward and say, hey, I know we have this info somewhere. I know it'll help me. How can we make that happen? But only if they understand conceptually what dark data is, will they even know what to look for, right? So strategy, governance, and literacy, none of these are big 18-month technology projects. You can get started on them right away, and they can go a long way towards setting up a data-driven foundation to start using dark data and use data in general more efficiently.
I smiled twice when you said that you love data governance, and I was picturing someone's listening and also smiling because they too love data governance. So I don't think you're alone on that. And I love kind of this theme that's emerging of everyone being invited to be more of a detective in their organization. So gathering clues, looking for things that maybe you haven't seen before, maybe permission to pause from, the frenetics of the day and just really commit to asking these questions of the data, whether it's to elevate it, to ask it to do something new that it hasn't before, or just to shed a light on something in the business that you desperately want to understand better. So thank you so much for those tips, Rob, and you can have your data governance. I think that is completely fair. So just to bring this all home, I think a few core things just that we wanted to leave you all with is there's very much a movement right now towards understanding dark data, right? Us understanding what it means, the sheer quantity that we have in our organizations, as Katoria alluded to earlier, the fact that it's going to keep getting created regardless of what we want with it. And that there is a real way in which we can aim how we leverage and elevate the dark data. So we have a choice every day to wake up and decide, what do we want to do with it? How do we want to make sure we're maximizing its value? We can look towards use cases of the companies we admire and how they're doing it. We can look internally with how our internal leaders or departmental functions are tackling dark data. And we can talk about it like we're doing now. We can talk about it in convening sessions and with our partners and our thought partners at other organizations as well. So it's about just understanding there are specific use cases that we can bring into our organization as it relates to the illumination of the dark data. And then finally, for us to always remember that there's a cost to not doing something right now with the data, and just understanding what that means for us as leaders and our teams and our organizations, and then taking that action to do something in honor of illuminating it. So, Rob, I want to thank you so much. Katoria, we thank you, and thank you for being in two places at the same time. You've totally perfected the art of like teletransportation or something. We're not quite robots, but we figured it out. And we invite you to please connect with us, give us a follow on LinkedIn. We're going to be doing more of these LinkedIn Lives, and we are going to be continuing to share some resources on how you can make sure to take that stance with dark data. So with that, we thank you so much for being here. We look forward to connecting with you, and we will catch you all soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.